Well, good morning. So I'm Stefan Durkon here. I'm the director of the Center for the Study of African Economies, and thank you for being here for our keynote at our 2024 conference. Before I will say a little bit more about the keynote, I think this is a good moment, since you're all here and not already on Tuesday at the end of the conference beginning to think of when your train is and when your flight is, to actually get a chance to thank on my behalf, but also I hope on your behalf, the conference organizing team. And that's basically, we have our executive director, Rose Page, who is an amazing administrator and manager of a team. And I want to just do a shout out to Fiona, to Claire, to Sue and Anda, who have been amazingly. And I hope you will join me to give them an applause from the floor. So people keep on asking me, how long have you been doing this conference? And I sometimes don't quite know. It's about 30 years we've been doing this, but definitely for the last 15 years at least, the formula has been exactly the same. And so it means we always have on the Monday morning a keynote of a distinguished speaker. But we thought today we wanted to make sure that the distinguished speaker was even be more distinguished by actually asking someone else, a distinguished person, to actually introduce the distinguished speaker. So I would like very much to introduce to you Adnan Khan, who is a friend of CSAE, friend of the Center for the Study of African Economies. He's the chief economist of the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, and he's also a professor of practice at the London School of Economics. And Adnan, why don't you come to the floor? Adnan will, after the keynote speaker that he will now introduce in a moment, give a few comments first, but hopefully we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A then, and just begin to think about your questions for the moment the session starts. So Adnan, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Always a pleasure to be here, and very nice to be called distinguished. If my family was here, they will be very proud, and my mother will actually believe it. Okay. So I will always enjoyed this conference, and today in particular, when I'm introducing a really distinguished person, someone who is really distinguished both in terms of the scholarship, but also the practice, being a great practitioner of what he is studying. So Dr. Arkebe Oqubay has been special advisor and former senior minister to the government of Ethiopia, serving under 3 different prime ministers, if I believe correctly. Yeah. Also former mayor of East Addis Ababa, in fact, voted the best mayor in Africa, also played a huge part in the industrial transformation of Africa, has written quite a lot, many books, including the one that I'm eagerly looking forward to now, the Oxford Handbook of Industrial Policy, and is currently serving as the British Academy Global Professor at SOAS, University of London. I can't think of any better person to deliver this lecture than Dr. Oqubay. So without further ado, over to Dr. Oqubay.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. First, let me thank Stefan for the invitation. And also Adnan has been able to be part of the session, and I'm very honored. I could see some familiar faces, but this is, by all standards, an amazing gathering of researchers, such a huge number. And I was looking at the programs, and the programs are quite diverse and a lot of engagement of researchers. So I couldn't see a better forum to discuss Africa's transformation. And I will attempt to pull from my long practice and experience. I usually prefer to see myself as a practitioner and policymaker rather than academic. but I have been privileged to be involved in extensive research in relation to economic transformation, structural change, and I try to reflect structuralist development economics as a perspective. But I have always promoted working with all disciplines, and in all our books and publications, we have been advocating pluralism, as we need all types of perspectives, interdisciplinarity, which is quite important, and also supporting research with evidence. And today I'm going to pick many as snapshots of this evidence, because without putting that in line, it will not be possible to explain transformation of Africa. So I'm very honored to join you, and I will try to be as precise as possible. So, what is being told about Africa? These are some highlights. These are mainstream media, and these are articles published in the last 6 months. The Bloomberg in September and the Financial Times in December. And you could see the highlights are that the West better start paying attention now before it's too late. The call is not on Africans, the call is on Western governments. And you could also see the assertion, 14 of the 20 most corrupt governments are in Africa. This is a narrative told, retold in mainstream media. So I'll try to put in 3 areas. First, I'll try to present some evidence what the transformation of Africa would mean. Secondly, I would like to talk about the debates, the current debate on development strategies. There is actually huge debate now, which are quite important. We have seen influential scholars at Harvard, at Columbia University, talking about African fate of industrialization and exports. And third, I would like to highlight also some perspectives on policymaking. We need to talk some on transformation, because the last 5 years, at least, the conversation, the discussion has been about COVID-19 pandemic, recession, about financial squeeze, a very popular word now, and geopolitical tensions. So the discussion on transformation, which is quite important from long-term perspective, is not a dominant narrative or discussion now. So I would like to argue Africa is making progress, and there is modest growth in the continent. However, we see significant variation among African countries, because we are talking about over 50 African countries, and we see also diversity across the continent. And structural transformation has also lagged behind. And that is a central point I would like to argue. This is a book we published in 2020, and according to my understanding, it was downloaded over 100,000 times. OEP, Adam is here, wouldn't want the figure to be named, but it was the highest downloaded book, because it's an open access book. And we talked about evidence about the need on linking theory with policy. So the key important bases are, first, low economic diversification and growth. Second, weak productive capability. And third, exports and the constraints on balance of payment. We could list longer list. We could come and raise many constraints. But to my understanding, these are 3 important drivers of structural change in Africa. So let's start with some of the evidence. This is a 50 years growth story of Africa. And from here, we could see the continent has been growing by 3.5% on average in 50 years. And global average growth, the growth rate of the average growth rate of at global level was only 3.1%. So Africa has been growing faster than global average, and it's only Asia that has been able to grow faster. But this is a very interesting story. If you look between 1981 and 2000, it's below the growth rate of the at global scale or global average. And this is the time of when economic liberalization, Washington consensus, was the style of the day or the fashion of the day, and many of the government apparatus were dismantled. So the key point, Africa is not going backward. Actually, in the last 2 decades, it's making good progress. In the year between 2001 and 2010, Africa was almost growing at the same rate like Asia, 5.4, 5.5. Here also we can see we have to contrast countries. We cannot contrast 50 countries in a slide, but we have tried to take 5 countries as a case. And this is part of the study we are conducting, the research funded by the British Academy. And we have tried to take 5 important countries with very diverse background and economic structure. Ethiopia, a low-income country, but which has shown rapid economic growth in the last 2 decades. Morocco, which has really shown progress in industrialization. Mauritius, which is an example of structural transformation. And Nigeria, basically oil and gas dominated economy. South Africa, the most carbon-intensive economy, and also which did not record rapid growth. And Vietnam, bringing Vietnam will be important comparison. It's easy to bring China, but everyone will say China is a different giant. So Vietnam could in many ways resemble African countries. And here again, as we see, we can see high growth rate in Ethiopia, and we also see, which is similar to Vietnam, and we also see that the different African countries, including Morocco, Mauritius, we're also making good progress in terms of economic GDP growth. In terms of GDP per capita, we could see it's a different level. Mauritius stands high, Ethiopia at the bottom. This gives us a lesson that there is huge diversity among countries, but we also see some significant progress. It's not only growth rate we need to compare. We have to look at the quality of growth, and one way to look at it would be composition of the economy. And from the trend of value added by sector basis, as we could see, especially the industrial sector, which is the orange color, is a very, very important in this comparison. As we could see, Vietnam, the yellow is quite expanding and it's very consistent. And we could also see a similar growth or pattern of Morocco. And we also see in South Africa it's not making much progress, but the service sector is growing quite fast. In Nigeria, again, the growth in terms of value added by sector was not that much significant. Shares of value added by sector, again, we see a similar pattern. Then let's talk about manufacturing value added, because from the industry sector, which is composed of mining, electrical utility, manufacturing, etc., the most critical is manufacturing. And in manufacturing, the last 20, since year 2000, we could also see the pattern. And again here, those which are with low level of industrialization, like Ethiopia, has been able to make quite rapid growth in terms of value addition. And an important element or case is the Moroccan economy as well. And here, as we could see, the vehicle production in automotive industry, because Morocco has been building a very competitive automotive industry. And as we could see, the growth between 2011 and 2022 has been quite dramatic, 7 times. Again, in export, about 6 to 7 times. This shows that it's mainly the large and medium-scale manufacturing that's growing faster than the small-scale and cottage industries. In terms of export, we see quite diverse composition. And here the most impressive is, again, in Morocco, in production of equipment, which is similar to Vietnam. And then we can see the extreme comparison. Nigeria, mainly oil and petroleum, dominating over 91% in terms of export, and Ethiopia also raw agricultural exports primarily being exported. This is the chart showing export and import of goods and services, and this will strongly highlight that export is not only an option, but it's a necessity for African countries to make structural change. And we could start from Vietnam. We could see the Vietnam trend is growing quite fast, and both import and export have been growing. On the other side, Morocco also, with some gap, we could see similar growth pattern. When we look at Mauritius, which is linked with the composition of the economy and the level of economy of Mauritius, that it has been growing modestly, but the starting point has been quite high. We see some inconsistency in terms of Nigeria, and a very startling example is Ethiopia, where import is growing faster than export. When there is rapid economic growth, it's more likely imports is going to grow fast. And if it's not supported by export growth, if export doesn't grow faster, the GDP grows, it's obviously to bring a balance of payment constraints. And this is absolutely an important lesson for African countries. Here we see the average growth in terms of merchandise export and services export, and Africa's contribution globally is marginal. But I want to highlight here the importance of service. The importance of service is not just job creation. Service is important, especially if it's the tradable goods element. And here we could see that the service sector has been able to export more, even in comparison to goods export. So manufacturing is important, goods export is quite important, but on the services sector, what is the most critical is the one that has the tradable element, or that has high value exportable services. This shows us employment in industry, and we could see the comparison, Ethiopia's very low employment level in terms of employment in industrial sector, and we see the Vietnam especially showing quite significant progress, because employment in industry is quite important within the sector, but obviously, of course, indirect employment as well. Gross capital formation and gross savings of GDP, we could see an interesting element here. Vietnam has been recording over 30% in both gross savings and gross capital formation, and within the 5 countries, Morocco and Ethiopia has been making huge investment in capital formation and savings. This also tells us this has to accompany rapid economic growth. So we have been talking about the composition of the economy, the rate of growth. I would like to talk about productive capacity, and I will bring 3 indexes to illustrate this. The bottom one is Africa, and the average Africa's in terms of the index rating is about 28%. Average globally has been about 45%. And here we see a significant gap between other regions and Africa. That is built on UNCTAD's index with the definitions they have been able to present. This is a frontier technology readiness still by UNCTAD. And here, as we could see, 3 countries, South Africa, Morocco, and Mauritius, from the 5 countries, are on the upper middle score group, which really shows that the progress, but it also shows us that many of the African countries are on the low category. Global Innovation Index is provided by WIPO, and this also highlights some of the points which I was mentioning here. Again, Mauritius, South Africa, and Morocco have better ranking here, and Nigeria and Ethiopia are on the lower end. Yeah, so from this, the points we just have been looking, we can starkly see that structural transformation has been lagging, and that is the most important driver for policy and development strategy. But that's not the only element we have to see. We also need to see other drivers. And from my perspective, demographic dynamics is quite important. Demography and technology are the fundamental drivers of social transformation. And here, when we talk about demographic dynamics, we need to do a lot of research on that, on how it's going to be linked with development strategy. So this is quite significant because it's combined or associated with the demographic decline also in advanced economies, but also in emerging economies. China, for the first time, has shown decline in 2023. And which means this is being also linked with aging, fertility decline. In Africa, we see high population growth. 2.5 billion population is forecasted for 2050. About 800 million jobs are going to be required, and about 1 billion will be living in urban centers. So from this perspective, the urbanization shift needs important focus. And urbanization is a very, very positive force. Many governments try to limit urbanization, but from perspective of structural transformation and industrialization, it accelerates this, and also it has significant element in terms of political economy. Organized cities are better in putting pressure on governments to make developmental progress. So the implications are, from my perspective, 5. First, we need to create productive jobs, at least on average 30 million a year. Then it has implications for food security, and this has also implications for productive capacity and market growth, and of course, environmental sustainability. Sorry that the slide has been covered. Yeah, and in terms of population, what we see from here is about 26% will be living by 2050. Everyone talks about it. The key point is understanding the implication. But a key aspect also is that the cities over 300,000 population are going to grow even much faster. Third element is on the global growth. Africa does not live isolated from the global economy. On the global economy, I believe 3 elements are quite useful. First, the sluggish global growth. When we look at FDI trend, when we look at trade, and also even GDP growth. So this is quite important because it makes competitiveness will be even internationally quite to be useful and essential. The second element is a poly crisis, which has been fashionable talk these days, and volatility is a key element here. No one could see ahead the crisis that all countries are facing. And a third element, I believe this is a very positive element, is Asia is now the driver of the global economy. It's not only China, but also India. And about 60% of annual growth is now coming from Asia, and this is going to grow. And about 54% of population globally also lives in Asia. This has implication for Africa. It has policy element, and we'll be looking at this later on. So we now go to the second element. The evidence we have been able to look is adequate to show Africa is making progress, but Africa faces very significant structural challenges. So from development strategies perspective, I want to highlight on productive transformation, on sustainability issue, and also Africa and global transformation aspect. Yeah, the first one, productive transformation as the core driver. We know the current financial squeeze, but it's not going to be addressed by making some adjustment, some prescription given by IMF, the change is going to come primarily when it's linked and integrated with productive transformation. So here, I would like to highlight some of the debates being raised. Manufacturing is being doubted by highly influential scholars as well. And one key that is missing in the analysis is that, first, it's not being supported by empirical evidence. And the second element is the role of manufacture should not only be looked from the data of trade. It has to be looked from its role as a driver of structural change and growth in terms of productivity, in terms of its contribution in learning and also in transformations of the whole economy. We also need to look at exports. Exports is still seen as optional in many governments. I believe even where we have seen high GDP growth and also a focus on industrialization in Ethiopia, the policies have not been consistently to embrace and to support export sector. And this is a major drawback. One of the hypotheses or proposition of Turnwell has been the growth of an open economy will primarily be shaped and determined by the level of exports. So we need the export for balance of payment constraints to relax. We need that as a source of international learning. We need that as a driver of productivity because of the benefits in terms of market size. Here, I would like to highlight in terms of late industrialization the importance of productive investment, industrial ecosystem, and also the focus on industrial workforce and linkage dynamics. On industrial policy, the debate has usually focused on the role of state, mainly, interventionist state or etc. But the key point, industrial policy as a concept is the key driver in terms of structural transformation and economic catch-up. This can be proved by the historical data, by historical evidence. Also, the debate written, covered in many papers, is narrowly focused and it's highly also infused with ideological arguments. Is it you? Oh. Okay. Yeah, so from industrial policy perspective, I would like to highlight some basic principles that have been highlighted some 200 years ago. One in the US, one by German political economists. And here, the key concept is that industry consists of the true wealth and prosperity of a state. And 3 points are highlighted by Alexander Hamilton, who was the first head of Treasury of the US. And he highlights 3 important points which are still valid. First, importation of productive power, which we are now saying productive capability. The second point is protecting the development of productive power. You have to nurture, you have to protect it, you have to use all instruments. And the third element is only export manufactured goods, value added, and not export, raw inputs. I would like to highlight on the industrialization is a viable option in this continent by raising some important examples. One is automotive and aerospace industry has been flourishing in Morocco, and the progress has been quite impressive. And a lot of policy interventions had to be part of this process. Cement industry in the continent has been growing quite significantly. So in year 2000, there was below 50 million tons of cement being produced in the continent. Now it's over 225. So 4 times growth in cement. Aviation industry, one good example is Ethiopian Airlines, which generates over $5 billion export earnings. And it also has significant technological capability element as well. And it generates over 50,000 direct and indirect jobs. Textile and apparel in many countries, including Ethiopia, Morocco, Kenya, and West African countries, it has been showing quite significant growth. Chemical industry, one of the most successful growth in terms of chemical industry has been in Morocco, which is a major producer of nitrate and its value added. Horticulture and high-value exports have also been growing in many countries, including Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Africa. Green energy has been a new field of growth in many countries. So we can list many examples as cases to show that it's possible to grow and some productive sectors can expand despite the competitive hurdles they face. But productive transformation, we cannot only talk about it. We are now living in a time where environmental sustainability becomes an essential policy agenda. And the way I try to say on environmental sustainability is not from saving our planet. That's important, but that may not give the required inspiration. The key point is that the environmental sustainability has significant implication for productive transformation. So here, as we see, first we need to link it with the politics within the fossil oil industry. The fossil oil industry is highly subsidized by advanced economies and also by some emerging economies. And currently, the subsidy is over $1 trillion every year. We also see super profits of this industry. In the last, since 1970, according to World Bank data, over 50 trillion has been the profit of the fossil oil industry. We also see indirect subsidies as well, which is estimated about 5 to 6 trillion. So the key issue is not that not only the green agenda is not being supported, but also the fossil oil industry is highly still supported and is incumbent at the current situation. Second element we need to consider is the issue of early transition and looking at it from a green industrial revolution. In many African countries and governments, the perception is that African countries, since they were not responsible to generate climate crisis, they should not focus on climate change. And the whole discussion has focused primarily on just energy transition. From my perspective, although this is partially has truths, but this cannot be an adequate reason, and the view should not be limited to that. And my view is, from just energy transition perspective, advanced economies are not, despite any pressure put, are not going to have a fair treatment to the agenda. So the rationale we have to see is, how can we use climate change as a positive force to ensure that it can generate economic growth? And we can see with the examples by some emerging economies, most notably by China, the importance of the green growth agenda. And if we look the examples of example of China, in year 2000, there was no solar energy produced in China. There was no EV. So this doesn't look temporary provisional convention hall. Stefan, you are building engineering capability here. Okay, so on the green, I'm raising China because the advancement we saw could have been achieved even in South Africa in a similar context. So China was not able to produce any solar or wind and EVs in year 2000. Now the leading economy in terms of, in these industries, green industries, is mainly China. And the key lesson is an early transition is absolutely important to sustain economic growth and also to build a sustainable economy. So it's quite important. The early transition is beneficial to African countries, and we can note this from example of South Africa. If South Africa had acted on transforming its carbon neutral economy by year 2000, before even blackout or load shedding was introduced, it would have been in a better position. Now, over 80% is still dependent on thermal power or coal-fired plants, which has now become so complex and a major political issue. So from an African perspective, early transition is quite absolutely important. However, we need to also highlight that diverse pathways and strategies are quite necessary, and we cannot put standard solution to every country. The diverse pathways are relevant because the intervention required in different sectors is different. Second, across national economies also, the nature, the carbon neutral nature and the structure of the economy is different, requiring a different strategy. The other point I would like to highlight is about this. The hype we now hear is about green hydrogen, about the critical minerals and also rare earth minerals is the agenda now. But it's not going to bring green transformation, because green transformation means transforming the whole economy. So it requires decarbonization in every economic activity, generating green growth in new technologies as well. And Africa's perspective should be based on a complete transformation of the economy to make it sustainable. I also would like to bring as a case, the question here is 100% renewable energy feasible? And my answer is yes, it's possible. And a good example is Ethiopia. Ethiopia entirely depends 100% on renewable energy. About 89% in hydropower and 11% in wind energy. Even solar energy is not competitive to compete with hydropower. So with the big scale of production, the country has been able to expand and put investment in expansion of energy compared with its low level of economy. But also the pricing has been designed to support productive activities as well. So currently, the cost per kilowatt hour is between 2 and 3 US cents, which is the lowest in the continent and probably also one of the lowest globally. So the key lesson here is that the earlier transition we make, the better position we are, and the cleaner production system we develop, we are investing in the future, and African countries should now move from the conversation on just energy transition towards ensuring that we move on the green growth direction and green transformation. Yeah, here we can see the implication of the current conversation. Now it's becoming the critical mineral is becoming a geopolitical issue. And here what is says is that Africa should play a huge role, not in its development strategy, but support other advanced economy strategy. So it's just all dependency pattern to be continued. Again, here from European Union, which has been a lot of discussion on green hydrogen, the agenda is still about Africa feeding European industries in terms of green hydrogen supply. So the critical approach should be, how can we use existing resources, existing capabilities to generate industrial capacity and also to ensure development growth in the continent. The third aspect I would like to highlight is an element of international political economy, and we cannot separate it from development strategy. And here there is a need to diversify economic ties. Why? Especially like Asia and other emerging economies, they are playing a much more prominent role, and this trend is going to continue. So Africa needs to expand alternatives in terms of trade, in terms of investment, in terms of also financing. Another element we need to consider is how can we make African Continental Free Trade Area as a driver to increase scale or market, because one of the main drawbacks comparing ASEAN and comparing AFCFTA or African countries is the fragmentation of the market. And the market size and scale is quite important driver of international competitiveness. So we need to have a strategy that promotes one single market, but also that promotes value addition and industrialization, and that also puts African positioning in international trade to be improved. We can only achieve this in a context where multilateralism and there is a reform in terms of international governance system, because the current system does not favor developing countries. We have seen it during COVID on international patent rights issue. We have seen it in WTO rules in relation to investment, trade, and technology. We have seen it in terms of food aid and subsidies, and also climate change position. The last aspect I would like to talk is on policy making. The usual advice is African countries, even by prominent scholars, African countries should give focus to infrastructure. They should also give focus to health. They should give focus to education. They should also give focus to agriculture. All are in the wish list. And a typical example is SDG 2030 and also 2063. But the key issue is a country with a very low resource level, with low level of, let's say, education, resources, infrastructure. It's not able to succeed by focusing on everything. So we need to look at an approach that will really help to boost the capacity. So here one starting point should be that a belief that Africa can and is also making progress. And without this realistic optimism, we are not going to make the required transformation. And it also requires a perspective, because the advice given is Africa needs matured, let's say, institutions. Africa also needs, when it's talk about minerals, talk about oil, about arable land, everyone refers to these physical resources. But what is more important is not these endowments, but the policy approach on how to move the ladder or to climb the ladder with the resource limitations African countries have. So one important lesson we could learn from the reference, especially Albert Hirschman's approach, has been to look at imbalances and tensions and constraints as a positive force. I can just give you one specific example that could really help how this could be looked at. During COVID-19, tourism collapsed in all countries because there was no passenger mobility during this period. The whole aviation industry almost collapsed. And all airlines, European, Asian, and even the US, all received subsidy in terms of tens of billions and billions. And as I have been a member of the vice chair of Ethiopian Airlines board, when the COVID-19 came, the issue we had to discuss at the board was, what should we do now? The government is not going, the treasury is not going to give subsidy. And we said it will be morally wrong to request treasury to give subsidy to Ethiopian Airlines, given that the economy is at low level. It's a developing country. It cannot afford. So the decision of the board was Ethiopian Airlines should be able to either swim and survive, or it should sink. There is no way we could ask the support from the government. And based on this decision, it had to revisit all its strategy. So one of the key strategy was passenger travel had already freezed, but cargo sector was growing faster at that time. And Ethiopian Airlines improved the productivity of the cargo planes twice, 3 times. But that was not enough. Over 30 aircrafts, Airbus and Boeing, had to be converted from passenger into cargo planes. This is technologically very complicated, and it requires certification from Boeing and Airbus. And it was done. At the beginning, it took like a week, 2 weeks to convert one, but later on, it was possible to do it in 2 days. And over 30 aircraft were converted to that. So year 2020, Ethiopian Airlines didn't receive a cent, but it became profitable. It also diversified to other businesses, to hotel businesses and other projects. And through this diversification and using this crisis to develop its resilience, it has gone through COVID crisis being profitable. And the key element was the decision was not to lay off any employee of Ethiopian Airlines, because once the crisis ends, the workers are going to be important in expanding the fleet. Now, the Ethiopian Airlines has 150 commercial aircrafts equivalent to Air Singapore and 3 times of Virgin Atlantic. So no one was laid off and no salary was cut. And the workers also got their bonus during this crisis time. But everyone was motivated to increase the efforts to make. This is one specific example that crisis could be a source to drive growth and also to improve resilience. I can bring many examples as well. So we need to look at different inducement mechanism to improve the policy dynamism. The other element I would like to highlight is, from my 30 years policy experience, what I have learned is it's not always that conventional wisdom works. Sometimes the unconventional way are the only approach that could really work. And one of the experience in Ethiopia's policy making is the government has always been taking big, ambitious programs. Sometimes they fail, sometimes they succeed. And one key parameter has been, if the policy doesn't work, always just drop if it doesn't work, a very typical pragmatic approach. So housing program was started in Addis Ababa when I was the mayor of Addis, a very comprehensive program. And we decided to expand it to 35 cities. Actually, it was expanded to 65 cities. Then in practice, what we saw is it was bringing some macroeconomic impact and was not linked with demand. And finally, all the program was cancelled in all 64 cities, except city of Addis Ababa. So there is a need for a bold decision and use every element as a source of policy learning. Again, I have highlighted this policy learning, and it's not about copying when we talk about policy learning. It's a basic approach. How do you use, by putting maximum effort in policy learning, that you can really have a significant impact? So in many African countries, industrial parks have been built since 1970s, in Mauritius, Senegal, etc. And until 2010, Ethiopia didn't have a single park. And the government's approach in 2013 was, the government admitted we don't have a clear policy and strategy on industrial parks, on creating industrial ecosystem. We are talking about manufacturing, but we are not talking about developing an industrial ecosystem, because manufacturing cannot grow without such a supportive ecosystem. And the approach decided was, let's first learn what others are doing and also relate with our condition. And 6 countries were studied: Mauritius, Nigeria, and also 4 Asian countries. And based on it, a new approach was developed. Again, when this strategy was adopted, the big point was, how do we know whether this strategy will work? So the decision was, we have to pilot it. We have to experiment. And this was done at Hawassa Industrial Park, an industrial city to be built in 9 months. And finally, it was done in 9 months. Many lessons were taken and was expanded to additional 15 industrial parks. And now there are about 25 industrial parks. And Hawassa Park, at its peak before COVID, was employing 35,000. So the key point is, the approach to policy has significant impact in expanding the projects, in also maximizing the impacts as well. Yeah, on role of state, now even the most advanced economists have learned during COVID crisis that state is an important player, and I believe this is quite absolutely true. Finally, I would like to highlight the importance of research. Research is I'm a practitioner, policymaker, but I have seen the benefit of research is having and supporting policy instruments as well. And there is no better person than Stefan, who have been also in the process. And one key aspect in using researchers in Ethiopia's government's approach has been to engage in many conversations and to explore all possibilities, but always the ultimate responsibility falls on the government to decide what works best. So a policy independence is quite important, but it's quite critical that researchers are promoted. Yeah, and on policy learning, yeah, industrialization is essentially about learning, as we could see from Amsden's quote. Yeah, these are the works which have been published by Oxford University Press, and we have here Adam Swallow, commissioning editor. And I encourage you, the key concept in these books has been to promote collaboration. You can write a book and you can close your own office and write a lot. But the key concept has been, how do you encourage pluralism? How do you encourage different perspectives? With the bottom line that everything has to be supported by empirical evidence. So the type of work we have been focusing are major conceptual issues on industrial policy, on industrial ecosystems, on environmental sustainability. And the work we have been doing on environment, we have just now completed the manuscript to be released by the end of the year. And also on encouraging empirical evidence of each African economy. That's absolutely important for policy, and also researches by scholars. Let me stop here and let me thank each one of you who have contributed significantly in researching African transformation, in coming up with better perspectives, and remember that every research is relevant. Thank you so much.
That was amazing. Thank you, Dr. Oqubay. As all distinguished lectures do, they make you reflect. They also make you ask more questions and give you more questions than answers. I'll share a few reflections, and I promise I'll end up with a magic word. So wait for that. If you hear policy discourses in Africa, unfortunately, they are often dominated by questions about macro stabilization, questions about boom and bust, questions about short-term debt dependence, and similar issues. But the real question to ask about Africa is, how does Africa embark on a sustained path of growth and development so that it catches up with the developed countries and lives up its true potential? So that brings us to economic growth. And as you know, like as Lucas said many years ago, it's once you start thinking about growth, it's hard to think about anything else. And a lot of that is about economic productivity. And we know that productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. It's also about structural transformation, thing that Dr. Arkebe talked about how do we change the structure of the economy, and how much of those options for structural transformation have been themselves being influenced by developments in today's world, both in terms of technology, in terms of our concern for climate change, but also things that are happening in developed countries, have options for developing countries change, how should that factor that in? And when we look at Africa, we see many bright spots. So Ethiopia is definitely one. There are a few others. But we also see that per capita incomes in Africa in many places have been diverging from advanced economies. We also see that labor productivity in many sectors is chronically low. We also see the challenge of demography, high levels of fertility with low productivity, or also possibly causing high levels of unproductive labor force. And how do we employ, how do you generate the jobs that are needed to keep them employed? This brings us to how do we get industrialization, how do we get growth, productivity-led economic growth in Africa. And to the major question about like how do we design policies in a world where we can't only rely on the invisible hand of the market. How do we design policies, industrial strategies that lead to that transformation so that we move from an invisible hand to a helping hand of the state? But the challenge with all of these strategies is the helping hand could also become a grabbing hand. And how do we avoid getting into a grabbing hand and have more productive industrial strategies? This raises a lot of issues. I'll just touch on those. So when can industrial strategies or industrial policies work? How central is manufacturing to this? Can industrial strategies work for a green economy, green industrial policy? Can it work in today's world with rising technological changes, rising economic nationalism, lower levels of international integration? And finally, can industrial policy work in Africa? So can it work in general? So we know there are all kinds of challenges. The bigger challenges are, can we avoid mistargeting? Mistargeting that leads to both political capture, but also leads to misallocation of resources. Can we lead to additionality so that like the investment that are made are additional? Can it lead to less political capture and not negative effect ideally positive effect, avoid negative effects on market competition. So all of them are open questions. How central is manufacturing? We know manufacturing is critical, is key, is still important for Africa. Dr. Oqubay showed very convincing evidence of how this is still very much relevant. We also know recent evidence, Rogerson and all, about the evidence for productivity convergence in manufacturing is weaker than previously thought. And there is a huge potential for services also. And as Richard Baldwin would say, the future of trade lies in intermediate services. And what implication does it have for Africa would be, again, a question to ask. And today we are marked with a world of rising economic security, high levels of economic nationalism, decreasing levels of international integration. And also a phase where there is industrial strategy being employed by developed countries at an industrial scale. It's funny that industrial strategy used to be a bad word. Economic orthodoxy was allergic to this, but it has made a comeback in a big way. And nowhere more so than in USA, where the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act are the largest industrial subsidies ever attempted. So how do developing countries, Africa, do industrial strategy in a world which is marked by these? Finally, can industrial policy work in Africa? A lot of people will say like it's marked by weak state capabilities and corruption. So the pushback to that will be like it exists everywhere else. For any other strategy or any other policy that one can think of, like one could easily think of other policies and one wouldn't ask the same questions. Why ask these questions about Africa? And one could also answer that like one only gets better at doing these things rather than avoiding these things, learning by doing, as Dr. Arkebe was saying. But still a question worth asking, as someone like Danny Roderick would say, like for industrial strategy to work, you need to have the information, the knowledge to where to intervene, but also the discipline and accountability to not to go into mistargeting and into negative value add. These questions are hugely important. So I'll just take a few more seconds and then hugely important in my current role also and Stefan's earlier role. FCDO, UK government, these are some of the most important questions for our international development strategy, aid. How do we help countries industrialize and develop? Many programs, Manufacturing Africa, development country trading schemes and others, but there's still an open question and it's become more open over time. So I'll just end up in a few seconds with the magic word that has never failed to capture the attention of researchers anywhere in the world, especially young scholars, funding. So for all of the questions that we mentioned here, Dr. Arkebe mentioned, and there is funding available from, among other sources, from sources which are funded or sponsored by FCDO. So I'm talking about International Growth Center, the PEDAL, Private Enterprise in Developing and Low-Income Countries, STEG, Structural Transformation and Economic Growth. So questions about the intellectual underpinnings of industrial strategy, what works, what doesn't work, and are hugely important for all of these programs. So keep an eye for calls for proposals. Thank you.
Let's collect some questions. Anyone would like to ask a question? Of course, if there's no hands, then why don't we then begin here? We begin here, could come down here. Yeah, and then we'll take 3-4 questions, is that okay, at a time, and then we'll continue. And of course, Dr. Arkebe, I will give you time to comment also on whatever Adnan said at the same time. Yes, please. And introduce yourself if you could.
Sorry. I'm Cristina Vitalitonna from CP in Paris. And it's only my belief, but that is, as you said, you have many objectives and you have to prioritize. You have to look where revenues can be created and also in the business in Africa, and revenues can be invested in other sector. And what is missing in this message is agriculture. For me, is the first step. There are many opportunities. Agriculture is very central in the continent for the arable land worldwide, for the greening transformation, for the nutrition problem, for demography. But So many revenues can be created and then it also being invested for industrialization. For me, it's a big opportunity not to be missed in the continent.
Very good. Yes, we come forward. We come later on back to the back. So, yeah.
I'm Rapers Peter IMF. Thank you very much for the very comprehensive lecture. I think I would like to touch upon two issues. One, you mentioned a number of times like geopolitics, and most is a negative thing, like a lot of volatility and such and risks. I wonder, like, what's your thought about possibility like opportunities? Think about like all this discussion about the role of these connector countries, you know, with lots of sort of de-risking or decoupling between the US and China, a lot of production being rerouted mostly through Asia. But, you know, it's true that Morocco, for instance, you mentioned at the beginning, is an example in which a lot of production is moved there. FDI moved in some of the countries. So which could be the opportunities for at least some of the countries in the continent to take advantage of that. The second point is something that I think you never mentioned in your talk. And I think there is a constraint in some of the discussion you have, which is like, it's a different economic environment than, let's say, 10 years ago. And in terms of like fiscal and the debt, like it's a big constraint. How you think that's going to sort of affect some of the policies that you could put in place? Thank you.
Thank you. We can go here and then we'll come on in front.
Hi, thank you. Leandro de Magalhães from Bristol. Two quick questions. One is, so going back to agriculture, the impression I had, and seeing some data from another paper, is that Africa does not have a comparative advantage in agriculture. I wonder if you would go as far as saying that. And two is the urbanization question, which is individual ownership of land, especially of land in the countryside, but also in urban areas, how is that going to impact this transformation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll take these two here in front, and then you have enough for a first round of replies.
Yeah, thank you. Sebastian Kranz from the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, ex-ODI in the Ministry of Finance and Planning of Uganda. It seems to me, based on my experience, that a key constraint is really the capacity also to absorb research in those government ministries, or actually the willingness to engage with high-quality research on these issues. And I just want to know how you see the trends there in African government in that respect.
Thank you. Justice.
And I'm Justice Mensah from the World Bank. Thanks for the excellent presentation as always. But I'm going to be a bit provocative, especially on the green transition. So I kind of think sometimes we confuse African leaders. Because part of your presentation, you said the green transition, the 100% green transition it's possible. And the example that you gave was Ethiopia, right? It's 100% renewable. That's true. And I think a lot of the East African countries have that potential. But we shouldn't generalize it, right? So you go to West Africa, and it's 100% renewable is not possible. Should these countries not industrialize? So Senegal now has huge deposit of gas. Should it abandon the gas and now start to spend a little capital it has to spend on solar, wind, etc.? So I guess the point I'm trying to say is, within Africa, and you rarely mentioned, there are nuances, and so a lot of these narratives should not also be based on a few country examples that work, and then let us generalize and say, oh, it's possible. Even in the US now, in spite of all of these things, the US is there's still a lot of controversies about new gas fields being opening and all that. And how do we think these low-income countries in Africa will all of a sudden industrialize by just switching completely to renewables, leaving all the gas deposits? Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Justice. And I'm sure the president of the World Bank would have not quite agreed with you. Please, Arkebe. Yes.
Thank you very much for the questions. And I'm happy that if my speech has been able to provoke so many questions, it means I have achieved my objective, because I've at least been able to provoke questions. Let me start with Justin's point. On the green transition, my view is ultimately we have to go green. And early transition is much more economical and preferable is my key point. And this can be supported by many researchers, including Oxford scholars who did on the various technologies related with green and came up that it's cheaper by 2050. Early transition in these technologies can be more cost effective. So this can be proved by that. But the other point you raised is a different question. What should countries which are using coal, what should they do? What about if they have oil? For instance, one of the cases I put in my slide is petrochemical hub in Nigeria, which was just inaugurated before a few months built by Dangote. There may have been delays, but I consider it one of the it's a fantastic project because even from green transition perspective, it's more useful. And in terms of productive transformation, it's very, very absolutely important project. So the view in, the idea, especially mainly by Western countries given, don't exploit fossil fuel or stop coal, etc. From my point of view, this lecture doesn't work. This is absolute hypocrisy, and we know actions in relation to developing or in supporting fossil fuel industry, which I mentioned, subsidy. In 2022, the subsidy given 2022 and 2023 in 18 months, subsidy given in Europe is $700 billion. So these countries are not working for green transition, and the agenda to support African countries with 100 billion is up to now, no one has been able to support it. So this is hypocrisy. And I also should mention the issue of measuring carbon emission, which is also linked with this. In carbon emission measurement, what are we told? The gross emission is usually referred. India generates this, China this. Normally, what we have to see is the per capita. And what we also need to see is the cumulative impact to see who is generating more carbon gas emission to the environment. So if you ask me about this gas exploitation in West Africa, my answer would be, if these countries find it a feasible project, if they decide to stop it, they can decide. But no one should instruct them to stop or to freeze. So Uganda could develop its petroleum, or now recently we have heard Cote d'Ivoire as well. There should not be any restriction. But the key point is, by delaying, what do you benefit? Let's look at Nigeria as a case. Over 90% is the economy still dependent on oil and gas. And we have reached a point that energy generated by oil and petroleum is becoming more expensive at this point because of the advances in terms of technology in wind and solar energy. So in the coming 10 years, it will be more expensive, at least for electrification purpose. For heating, there will still be needed, and oil and petroleum will be needed also for the petrochemical element as well. So this is a big risk. Let's look at the case of South Africa, depending 80% on coal. By delaying it, by late transition, it's putting the economy in a very difficult position. We have to remember the the border carbon restriction also put by European Union, which will be effective by next year. So it will affect the export goods as well. So my point is, I'm not saying they should not develop. I'm saying by taking the initiative to follow green growth through decarbonization process or investing on green technologies, every country can benefit from this process. This is a key point I want to highlight. And unfortunately, the conversation in Africa is primarily focused now on just energy transition rather than on green transformation. I'm trying from the last to the first question. On research and policy link, that's a major gap. Measure all researches you have been doing. To what extent has it been able to support policies? So one element we need always to see is, are our research questions the purpose? It could be to develop theories. So in that case, you don't need to think about policies. But if the ultimate goal is to make a contribution, from the very beginning when we designed the research questions, we need to raise this point. And the second point is, how do we create platforms where policymakers and also researchers can jointly have some conversation? I'm aware that there are some cases like in South Africa, conversations between policymakers and academics who do some research. Advisory councils also are relevant in this perspective. So it raises an issue that we always need to think, the issue of relevance to policy when we conduct research, if we are not looking or researching to develop, a big theoretical question. Agriculture, my belief, and from my country's story, is that agriculture is absolutely important for an economic growth. And actually, Ethiopia's takeoff was based on the role of agriculture. At some point, agriculture needs to be to play important role, but manufacturing has to gradually take over as a leadership, because in terms of overall productivity, manufacturing is much more competitive in terms of productivity compared with agriculture. But let's look again at agriculture from a different point of view. We always refer, when we talk about Africa's agriculture, arable land. When we refer about arable land, we are not talking about transformation of agriculture. Let's look at the most successful country in terms of agriculture transformation, Holland. It has been for quite a long time the second largest exporter of agricultural goods. The size of Holland in terms of farms is very limited, but the scientific advances made in agriculture is quite dramatic. So it's not the size of land we always need to see. It's not about the resource of these critical minerals we need to think. We know from history what matters is most importantly the strategy and the policy and making investment in especially productive capacities that we need to look at. I object African countries should not look and beg, as it was the case in 2022, to go to Ukraine and Moscow for wheat export. This is absolutely unacceptable. So food security is a key element, but beyond that, agriculture plays an important role in providing input for manufacturing, because manufacturing essentially uses two inputs, minerals and agricultural goods. And linking it with agriculture gives it much more significance in terms of wealth distribution as well, compared with mining. It also is a major source of export. This is, Brazil is a good example, a major exporter of agricultural goods. So my perspective is we need to focus and build agriculture, but we shouldn't talk in totality about agriculture. We have to look at the different sectors and industries within agriculture, focusing on high value, of course, ensuring food security, and ensuring also improving the quality of input for manufacturing. So it's a very relevant point. Fiscal situation has changed, but if we look at the fiscal situation of many African countries, what we see is many governments still see the external financing as a critical element. A big question that needs to be looked at is the domestic savings. The mobilization of local resources is important. Equally, not even more important than external assistance. So the current situation, which is linked with the international system, is the high interest of the of loans, especially commercial, and also the value of dollar is becoming quite more expensive, which has put quite many African countries in awkward position. My emphasis has been on export. If I look many countries, including Ethiopia, the biggest problem is not generating the money to be paid. That's not the case. The most difficult part is generating the foreign exchange to repay even servicing of debt. So the export element, the foreign currency element, is linked with addressing the issue of balance of payment, the issue of financial squeeze. From domestic mobilization example, government should be able to look at various alternatives. And in Ethiopia's approach has been using World Bank resource in relevant industries. And in some cases, strategically sensitive projects, the government has been using its own resources, like the Grand Renaissance Dam, which cost us over $6 billion, was entirely mobilized 100% domestically. So using multiple sources for ensuring that export earnings grow fast as possible is going to be useful. The global opportunities, I don't see much opportunity in the China-US tension. It's a major tension because it creates unpredictability, and it's going to affect also African countries at some point. So from my perspective, the push for multilateralism should be the main push, rather than to think this is an opportunity for African countries to attract investment, because it will still be, they can relate it, products produced by, let's say, Chinese investors in Africa should be prohibited from exporting to Europe or US. So the geopolitical dimension of this, which has raised the issue of de-risking, decoupling, is not going to be useful for advanced economies as well as many emerging economies.
Shall we take another round, or you want to?
No, I just want what Adnan has been mentioning. He tried to cover all the debates around that. And on industrial policy, it's always good to think, assume there is, if we look at example of South Korea, for instance, I don't think General Park has read industrial policy and then designed industrial policy in transforming Korean economy. It's an automatic response. And the response is, how do we develop the economy? How can the state play an important role to push the private sector to move in that direction? Which sectors should we be able to develop? So it's more a way of an attitude, a way of thinking that it generates varied ways to boost the economy. So that's why we have to see industrial policy as a driver of economic transformation rather than to see from an abstract perspective.
That's great. We have a few more minutes, so we're going to go now to the back of the room. The front had a chance. So we start, and So Gurm there, that's good. Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dr. Arkebe. This is quite fascinating. I mean, the view on
Please introduce yourself, Gurm.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Gurm. I work for the World Bank, and I know Dr. Arkebe from long time ago as well. I think the view on industrial policy is not quite controversial, but the devil is in the details, the implementation capacity and the quality of implementation. And African countries are not monolithic. You know, you have those led by military junta, and you have those led by well-meaning presidents, and those that are being led by for-life presidents or rulers. Now, that would have implication how the economic and political space is organized. I'm wondering from your research, what have we learned in terms of, political organization that is more suitable for industrial policies, the way, the society could interact, think of the bureaucracy, the policymakers and the businesses, what kind of organization is conducive to push industrial policy forward? Thank you.
I think Augustine in front of you.
Yeah, thank you very much. This has been a very, very impressive presentation. Very much the way it was about 9 years ago, in December 2015, when you and I and other people assembled the Serenity of Lake Rubavu to talk about how to accelerate growth in Rwanda.
So you need to introduce yourself now.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. My name is Augustine Fosu, currently at University of Ghana. Thank you. All right. So my question really is, how well is the Ethiopian model doing? Because it was very captivating, and at the time of our assembly, it seemed clear that that was the type of model that most African countries should adopt. 9 years later, how is the Ethiopian model doing?
Okay.
And the question really relates to the political economy of the situation, the necessity for the state to play a critical role in that Ethiopian model. And I'm rushing to a meeting at 1 o'clock. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to ask my question.
Right, okay. And we have one more there. I think Nick here, and that's then the last question, I'm afraid.
Thanks very much. I'm Nick Lee, former Deputy Chief Economist of the Foreign Office, FCDO. Thank you, Dr. Arkebe. Absolutely terrific, really stimulating. And I couldn't agree more on your Thorwellian point of exports in the open economy and policy learning and the Africa Can attitude. My question, to provoke you a bit, is that if you listen to authors like Wen Ang, she might say political stability is a prerequisite for implementing these policies, since otherwise there's no incentive for long-term investment. And to put words in the mouth of another famous economist, Stefan might say the dominant elite coalition has got to want this. And if it doesn't want this, if it's involved in rents in an equilibrium, in a bad equilibrium, then no matter how brilliantly we design the policy environment, it's not going to happen. So sorry, Stefan, but my question to you, Dr. Arkebe, is, you've been speaking about policies, but so often we find the barriers is that those in control don't truly want this or can't deliver it, or the situation is not stable enough to create the long-term investment payoffs. So what would your advice be in those sorts of countries, which seems to be the constraint in so many countries across Africa?
Thank you. I would say three very closely linked questions, so please. So let's take this as, please give the reply then. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Starting with Augustine's question, I think Augustine left, I guess. He dropped the question. We had a meeting in Rwanda for strategic review of the Rwandan long-term plan. He was referring that about Ethiopia. So the first point is our memory always looks at the most recent event, and we mostly try to forget also the things that had happened earlier. And from an Ethiopian perspective, the story is Ethiopia has been known for war, for famine, and the most famous 1984 has been in everyone's memory. And after 1991, there has been dramatic economic growth between 1994 and 2003. For about 10 years, the economy was growing by 5.5%, according to World Bank data, twice Africa's average. And from 2004, for 15 years, it has been growing 10.5%. These are data. So this has been able to change the process, the dynamics of growth, which could be reflected on the average life expectancy, for instance, which had increased from 44 years to 67 years in a period of 25 years. So recently, the country also faced major political crisis since 2019 in particular. And the country has been fighting against itself as well, war and political instability. So there are two aspects we need to see. First, I don't think there is any country that can claim just always things will be smooth and rosy. And the process of development, from my perspective, even from European history, is a sort of spiral. It's a forward movement, but normally it's not a linear or a straight line. There are always cases of crisis throughout the process. And secondly, whether this crisis could really boost growth later on will depend on many factors, among which one factor will be whether the political elite will be ready to grab the opportunity to move things forward. So it's important to consider this. And I always object to the point of, following a model. There is no Ethiopian model, to be quite clear. There is no Ethiopian model. There is no Chinese model, to my understanding. There is no even Korean model. Even the export-led industrialization model is never a homogeneous approach. All Asian countries have been using East Asian countries' different models. So trying to capture the movement in terms of model is not going to be the right approach to really say, learn from that specific experience. This is what I would like to highlight. But there are important lessons we could take. We have been talking about many countries, different cases. And from these different cases, many lessons can be taken. From Mauritius, from what has happened in Morocco, from what has happened in Rwanda. So what we could learn is the state is never a neutral body. It either becomes predatory or it becomes a very productive government pushing for growth. So the state always, for good or for bad, plays an important role in terms of economic growth. So there are lessons we could take from all country experiences. On the issue of the elite, a very nice, excellent book of Stefan Dirken, which you can give me the book.
I will give it to you.
Yeah, Yeah, this is a very, very important book, and I had participated in writing in the debate, also, which has been published by Development Policy Review on especially development partners and assistance in particular. In my slide, I said mixed role, because from Ethiopia's experience, there were cases where development partners played important role, a positive role, and there are also cases where development partners played a very negative role. So, so I congratulate Stefan, and I hope everyone had got the opportunity to read the book. So on the elite coalition, where there has been rapid economic growth, we see in every country, including the US, the political elite play an important role, be it in the form of political parties. Here we cannot qualify whether it's democratic, because democratic by itself will be a very difficult concept to define, and no evidence suggests that the type of governance that produces the best outcomes, but we can suggest that the political elite's growth perspective and organization provides and influences, shapes the process of economic growth.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to close this now. I was carrying the book largely because there's some people who've bought the book and haven't picked it up from the reception. But by the way, there's some extra copies there as well at a very discounted price available as well. It's at the reception where you are registered. It's a better price than the bookshop. But anyway, it has actually a whole chapter on Ethiopia, and actually many of the questions asked around it. I can tell you Dr. Arkebe actually features in the book. We had both the ups and downs of that relationship when I was representing FCDO UK, different at the time. But I'm extremely pleased that Dr. Arkebe accepted our invitation to come and talk to you, and I hope you agree with me that this is a fascinating topic. This is always leads to lots of debate and discussion, but it's crucially important. And I would thank you for helping us to keep this conversation going around it, and I hope you will join me in a warm applause for Dr. Arkebe.